Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Social Justice Forums. I am your host, Daren, Jaime, and we thank you for joining us. Now, if you are asking the question, what is this show all about? Well, we bring you a forum discussing a deeper understanding of the issues and the inequities that so many people face. We go not just local, we go national and even international. From systemic inequalities to pressing social problems, our guests provide multiple perspectives and insights to help us better understand and address the challenges. Well, we invite you to stay connected with us as the Social Justice Forum starts now. And welcome back. Recently, the Bronx experienced the highest increase in rental rates across all city boroughs. According to Street Easy data, the growth is primarily concentrated in transit-accessible pockets, including University Heights, Pelham Parkway, Concourse, and Fordham. Now, while the Bronx offers cost savings and reasonable commutes, some experts believe it may still struggle to attract luxury renters away from Manhattan, Brooklyn, and the Queens in the future. Joining us now and sharing more, we are pleased to have the New York City Comptroller, Brad Lander, and we thank you for joining us, Comptroller Lander. And I know that you're in the midst of overcoming COVID, so I want to take a special thank you and say thank you for taking the time to be with us, even in the midst of your own illness.
Well, I really appreciate that. I'm feeling better, but next time I hope I will be able to be in person with you in the Bronx.
Yeah, need to have you in person. And listen, when you come up here, let's take a look at some of these rents, because as we're talking about rent today, obviously the Bronx, it was highlighted in your newsletter that you looked at the Bronx and you saw the numbers were peaking in a bad kind of way. So let's talk a little bit about this here, because when we talk about rent increases and things in our borough, what did you come up with?
Yeah, I was really stunned to see this data. I mean, the Bronx continues on average to have lower rents than the other boroughs, but the rate of increase over last year is staggering and much higher than the others. So compared to last year at this time, rents are up 8% in Manhattan, 7% in Brooklyn, 14% in Queens, but 30% in the Bronx. And so while the rent levels are still lower than the other boroughs, the pressure that puts on Bronx families, who are of course already disproportionately low income, is really staggering and troubling. And it means eviction rates continue to be much higher in the Bronx than other boroughs. And it really calls for focused attention to protect tenants and address affordability in the Bronx specifically.
Yeah. When we talk about the housing landscape, how does this actually impact the housing landscape, given the fact that we're seeing these numbers continue to rise and we're seeing more and more people actually possibly facing eviction?
Yeah. Well, so let's take one step back and just talk about what we think the trends are. Obviously, the city has long had a housing affordability crisis, and it's been developing over decades as the city has continued to create more jobs, but not create new housing at all income levels at the same rate. So we have had more people chasing fewer units. Then the pandemic comes along, and even though that meant some people left the city, first, that was disproportionately folks from Manhattan and Brownstone, Brooklyn, families who could work remotely, and much less so essential workers, folks who have to show up at their jobs in person every day. And then we've seen people trying to buy or rent additional space as a result of work from home. Maybe someone who had a 2-bedroom now wants a 3-bedroom. So they're consuming more housing. And then some of the people who moved away are coming back. And of course, now we have increased international immigration as well. And all of that together has amplified pressure on the housing market, driven rents up just staggering amounts all across the city, but again, especially over the last few months in the Bronx. And what that means, unfortunately, is, look, if you're somebody who's just graduated from college or ready to start out on your own, got a job, you can't find a place you can afford. And about a third of young people are saying that they're staying home and living with their families. That includes my son, for what it's worth currently. But also what it means is that landlords bring increasing pressure on existing tenants. And that's why eviction rates, which were on pause during the pandemic, have gone steadily up in recent months. Not as high as they were right before the pandemic, but still reaching post-pandemic records. And that is especially concentrated in the Bronx. To give you one other statistic here, of the top 10 neighborhoods for eviction filings in New York City, the top 7 and 8 of the top 10 are in the Bronx.
Yeah. Comptroller Lander, let me ask about what can we do here, given the fact that we see these numbers. The job is really, how do we stop this curve from happening and going even higher? What can the public do? What can elected officials do?
Yeah, let's talk about both short-term solutions and long-term solutions. In the short term, one thing we really need Albany to do is pass what are called good cause eviction protections, because tenants who are in rent-stabilized units have a strong protection so that even if market rents are rising by that 30%, landlords are still only allowed to raise their rents by the 3%. That's still a big increase if your income's not going up, but obviously, you can hopefully afford a 3% increase. You can't afford a 30% increase. That's only because we have rent regulations, but that only protects you if your unit is rent regulated, and a lot of smaller buildings are not. So Albany could extend tenant protections through this good cause eviction legislation that will protect thousands and thousands of Bronx families. So that's number one. Number two, we're supposed to be providing a lawyer, right to counsel, for every working class or low-income tenant who's facing eviction in housing court. But we've fallen way behind. There's good legislation passed by Bronx Borough President Vanessa Gibson and Manhattan Borough President Mark Levine when they were the co-sponsors when they were in the city council. I was proud to support that legislation. It reduces evictions dramatically by as much as a third. Unfortunately, the courts are moving forward with evictions much faster than we're providing people the lawyers that the law is supposed to entitle them. So we have to either slow down eviction filings or speed up legal service provision to make sure tenants facing eviction have the lawyers they need to provide fair protection and connect them to resources. So those are the short-term solutions, good cause eviction and right to counsel. In the long term, we need to build more housing at a wide range of income levels so there are more market rate units for people who can afford them so they don't push into the affordable units. But we also need to create a lot more affordable housing. We need to speed up the pace at which the city is deploying the affordable housing dollars we have. We need new vouchers from Albany to provide for affordable housing. And one thing that I would like to see is the city get back to what it used to do of not just developing affordable housing through for-profit developers building rental housing, but affordable cooperatives like Co-op City or amalgamated houses in the Bronx, what we sometimes call social housing, housing owned by cooperatives or nonprofit organizations that provide safe, decent, permanently affordable housing that can't be removed from the marketplace by speculative developers. So that's two short-term ideas and two long-term ideas, and we really need to implement them all with urgency.
Yeah, stay right there for a minute, because when we talk to people, we hear constantly a tale of two cities, right? The haves and the have-nots. We look around and we do see a lot of new development, affordable housing, luxury housing, those things. Then you have on the other side people who are saying, listen, I live in a community where we see this luxury housing happening, but yet and still things aren't affordable for me. And, the rent isn't affordable for what I've got, and the rent of what you're trying to bring in isn't affordable. How do we get to the place where we can get that balance, if you will, and create a healthy balance so that way we can see this within our communities and create better communities?
You're asking the exact right question, and it really is a paradox. I understand if you're a working class family in the Bronx and you see rents rising all around you and you see new market rate development going up, you don't think those new units are helping the affordable housing crisis. You think those units are gentrifying your neighborhood and diminishing opportunities for you and your neighbors. But the paradox is we really have to do both things. We do need more units overall in the market. Supply and demand is a part of what's going on here. And the lack of units we've created as more people have moved to and jobs have been created in the city is part of the problem. We need more market rate units, but we cannot expect working class and low income families, especially folks who have been in their neighborhoods a long time, just to embrace new market rate development, because theoretically over years that will solve our affordable housing problem. That's why I believe step one is to provide those lawyers to make sure people have eviction defense and expand good cause eviction protections. Because if people don't fear getting pushed out of their neighborhoods, they've got a little more ability to welcome new housing. And then second, let's make sure that while some of that new housing is market rate, that some of it is like the next version of co-op city or amalgamated houses, not owned by for-profit private developers, but owned cooperatively by Bronx working families themselves. When you go to amalgamated houses, when you go to Parkchester, when you go to Co-op City, you see that you don't have to have a gentrified luxury neighborhood to have a solid neighborhood, that working class Bronx residents can have decent affordable housing in communities where they and their families can afford to live. And we can do both those things. We can both allow new market rate development and create new social housing, and grow the city in a way that continues to work for the diverse range of New Yorkers that make this place what it is.
Give me an idea from your perspective as we look at the possibility of what rent rates can look like. What's that trajectory looking like right here in the borough of the Bronx and, across the city?
Yeah. I mean, look, if we don't change something, there's no reason that Bronx asking rents won't rise to where Queens and Brooklyn rents are, which unfortunately is, Bronx rents are still, a little above half of where asking rents in Brooklyn and Queens are. And the Bronx is a great place to live. And so if nothing else changes, if we don't put more tenant protections in place or create more units, then when young professionals, when people who have got that first job in Manhattan, they're, at a bank or a financial firm or a tech company, and they look around and say, where can I afford to live? If they're priced out of Brooklyn, if they're priced out of Queens, of course, they're going to look at the transit accessible neighborhoods in the Bronx, and that will continue to push Bronx rents up significantly. It may be that some of the Manhattan and Brooklyn neighborhoods are sort of, reaching a level past which people will pay. Bronx neighborhoods, to a lot of those families, unfortunately, look like a bargain. And that's why stronger tenant protections and more affordable housing creation is urgently needed.
Yeah. We talk about the other boroughs, but the Bronx does do pretty well when it looks at certain things. One in particular, online, right? If we're looking online right now, the online traffic for Bronx rental listings going up. But as these numbers continue to go up, what does it tell us?
Yeah, no, look, a lot of people have made the Bronx a great place to live, and this is the tragic irony of gentrification. You got people who lived through hard years, who have looked out for their neighbors, and helped contribute. They've opened restaurants. They, have a civic organization. They're doing that work to keep the streets safe through a violence interrupter program. All that work is so important, but if what that means is somebody from outside the neighborhood who makes more money is willing to come in and pay higher rent and outcompete someone from the neighborhood, you'll see good online traffic, you'll see heavy rental demand, you'll see job creation, you'll see economic energy. Unfortunately, it will go along with the displacement of families who have long lived there. Again, it doesn't have to be that way. Stronger rent regulations and tenant protections prevent people from being pushed out. More housing at a wide range of income levels, including significant affordable housing, can make sure there's room for everyone. And again, there's just so many places in the Bronx. I mentioned Parkchester, Co-op City, and amalgamated houses, but there's many more, folks who have shown you can build neighborhoods that people want to live in that remain affordable for working class Bronx families.
Yeah. When we look at the future, I mean, a lot of people are concerned about gentrification. It's a very real conversation that's being had. And we've seen a lot of people who have actually suffered. There are some people who say, no, it's not gentrification, it's progression. The fact of the matter is, in the hearts and minds of so many people, is gentrification. What can we tell people today given the fact that we're seeing these numbers, given the fact we're seeing people, not being able to afford where they're living at, homeless rates continuing to rise, and that looming question over people's heads, the Bronx and Manhattan also being gentrified.
Yeah, I mean, I guess what I think people should do is reach out to their elected officials and say, what are you doing to pass good cause eviction protections, and what are you doing to make sure right to counsel is in place for anybody facing eviction? Those are the two most significant things that will make sure Bronx families can stay in Bronx neighborhoods. That doesn't mean there wouldn't be new development and new gentrification around them to some extent, but to me, the core problem with gentrification is displacement. People might not love some new building that they don't think looks like a traditional building in their neighborhood. They might not love a new business that they feel caters to somebody other than them. But both those things are way better than facing an eviction and getting displaced from your neighborhood because rising rents mean that your landlord is pushing you out of your home. So to me, the number one response is to make sure people can remain in their neighborhoods and don't get pushed out. And then the number two thing is to do everything we can to make sure as new development happens, it genuinely includes affordable housing. And again, not just affordable rental housing, but permanently affordable cooperative homeownership housing. So working class families who have long been members of Bronx communities could buy something, could put down roots, and be part of future generations of the Bronx story. Of course, there's going to be change. There's always change in our neighborhoods. The question is, how do we make sure people who have lived there for years or for generations can really be writers of that story?
Yeah. Well, we know that developers are actually sinking money at astronomical numbers right here in the borough of the Bronx. A lot of people are looking around and saying, listen, we're seeing this happen, and it's real. The question is, are they going to be able to sustain renters and people taking advantage of these properties, given the fact that this money is coming in where the developers are putting it in, but are people actually going to be able to afford living there?
Well, that's two different important questions, and I'll take, because I mean, for reasons that I think are concerning, I do think the Bronx will stay a strong target for new market rate development for quite some time. And again, that's really just about the differential between Bronx prices and other borough prices. Even independent of what happens more broadly in the country, do we or don't we have a recession? In the city and the region, what happens with work from home? How do New York City's metro economic trends exist? So long as Bronx rents look like a great deal relative to Brooklyn or Queens or Manhattan, and you've got neighborhoods well served by transit that are good commuting options into the city, I think that the trend will continue, that developers are able to find people that will pay the rents they're charging, even as those rents continue to rise, because they'll still be below Brooklyn, Queens, and Manhattan rents. Your second question then, again, really is the important one. Who can afford those units? Is that people from the Bronx, or is that people from somewhere else? How do we make sure that those developers are including units that are affordable for Bronx families? And second, what are we doing to make sure that those rising rents don't lead to new pressure on existing Bronx renters, who might get pushed out of their buildings because once a landlord sees that they could charge a high rent on a vacant unit, they're tempted to vacate existing units in the effort to do it. So I think these trends are going to be stuck with us for some time, honestly, even if the economy cools. I think just internally, that is kind of, a trend we're going to continue to see in the Bronx. And that's why advocacy for good cause eviction, for the right to counsel, and for genuinely affordable and social and cooperative homeownership housing are at the top of my list.
Yeah. If you're just joining us, talking with New York City Comptroller Brad Lander, and he's sharing a little bit about the economic newsletter that he put out, where it really highlighted some discrepancies and some real startling numbers and some alarming numbers, particularly for people in the borough of the Bronx when it comes to rent rent hikes and where the trajectory is going right now. When you looked at that newsletter, you put that newsletter together, obviously you saw, and those are some pretty glaring statistics. Anything else stick out to you?
Well, every month we're looking. First, I'll say I encourage people to sign up for our newsletter. Every month, it's a treasure trove of information. Sometimes troubling, but sometimes encouraging. We're back to 99.8% of the jobs we had before the pandemic. So go to comptroller.nyc.gov and sign up for our monthly newsletter. You'll get a monthly update on how the national economy is doing and how it affects New York City, on how New York City's economy is doing, on job creation, on the housing market, on real estate markets. And then we try to break things out by borough whenever we see an interesting trend. I'll give you one that we saw a few months back. We looked at business loan, COVID interruption business loans. And in that case, we saw that Bronx businesses were badly underserved by those loans, that, Manhattan businesses, but actually the other boroughs as well, just got more access to small business loans designed to help people keep open during COVID. We followed up with the Department of Small Business Services, and I'm pleased to say they've changed some of their policies and practices, so it should correct that in the future. But one thing we try to do in that newsletter, in addition to taking a citywide look, is to drill down to the borough level and where, boroughs in general, but the Bronx in particular, either aren't getting their fair share or are seeing a trend. Then we drill down and try to make sure, because we know the city can only be thriving when the Bronx is thriving.
Yeah, and for people right now who want to get that economic newsletter, they go where to? Tell them where to go to.
Thank you. So Comptroller, Comptroller, comptroller.nyc.gov.gov, and you can sign up for that monthly newsletter. And we don't deluge you with it. That newsletter comes once a month. And a lot of people tell me it's a really valuable way of learning some good, solid information about what's taking place economically in our city.
Yeah, I want to just switch gears for a second. Talk to me a little bit about small business, because we know that a lot of them have been highly impacted after COVID. We can talk about the Bronx. We can talk about New York City. What are we finding out? Are small businesses really getting back to where they used to be? Because we've seen a lot of doors shut because of COVID.
Yeah, there's no doubt COVID was obviously devastating. And like I mentioned, that loan program didn't get quite fairly to all the neighborhoods it needed to. But there are some encouraging trends as well. Post-COVID, a lot of new small businesses opened up, and this was much more in the outer boroughs than it was in Manhattan. Obviously, with more work from home, you have some more opportunities for neighborhood businesses. So a lunch counter business that might have been in Midtown now, has a chance to open up in the neighborhoods. And I paid a visit a few months back to the Westchester Square bid in the Bronx, and it was so encouraging to see. There was a great spa serving kids and especially girls and young women in the Bronx. I've been to a couple of great new restaurants that have opened. So, again, gentrification, and development have some of the displacement downsides we talked about, but they do create new business opportunities for folks in the Bronx to open something up. Obviously, we just celebrated the 50th anniversary of hip hop, and that brought a lot of energy and attention to the cultural life and cultural scene in the Bronx. I've talked to some folks who are working on that Bronx River restoration and all of what's going on around there. So we'll keep an eye on that, because we want to make sure we don't have what happened with that COVID loan program happen again. But I do think this is actually a pretty good moment for small businesses and entrepreneurs to be able to start something new. And that is an opportunity. Again, even though rents have been rising, commercial rents remain lower in the Bronx than in other neighborhoods, creating some opportunity for the next generation of Bronx entrepreneurs to start their businesses.
Yeah. Obviously, when we look at the Bronx, we know that it's a place that is actually booming with people, booming with business, and booming with opportunity. We do have our set of challenges, but yet and still a lot of upside right here in the borough of the Bronx. As we can tell, as we said just a little while ago, developers are pouring a lot of money right here into the borough. As we forecast going forward in the future, what are some things that we should be paying attention to from your perspective?
Yeah. So every month, we've been keeping an eye on these questions of recession and inflation. Those are sort of the biggest picture questions. Inflation, the rate of inflation has come down, and that's good. That doesn't mean prices have come down because they're still going up. They're just going up at a much slower rate than they were a year ago, and that is good for anybody that's got to, buy clothes or buy gas or buy food. We couldn't sustain the rates we were having. But at the same time, the way the Federal Reserve Bank got the inflation under control was by raising interest rates, and that risks pushing an economic downturn. And we've seen slowing in job creation, but we haven't gone negative or turned into recession, either at the national level or at the local level. So that's a good sign, but we're going to keep watching that. An area where there's been a lot of economic growth is in healthcare and social assistance. That's obviously a significant industry in the Bronx with the Montefiore Network and many others as well. So that means at least that there's job opportunities. Now, that we need to push to make sure those are good job opportunities. So I was really encouraged that New York State nurses, NICENA, were able to, after some strikes, win significant pay raises, both at their private hospitals and their public ones. There's a lot of issues like that, pay parity for childcare workers. If people, we're seeing some of these labor actions and strikes around the country, but, that's not just the writers or the actors or the auto workers. We need to make sure that daycare workers and healthcare workers and home care workers are also receiving the kinds of increases that they need to get by. So all of those things are things we'll keep watching.
Yeah, a lot of things to keep watch of, and as we go throughout the course of the end of this year, we'll be keeping our eyes focused, especially as we talk about the rents and the increasing rents. What is your office? When we talk about your office, what does your office hear a lot of, particularly from city residents? What's some of the top things on the list that you get?
Yeah. So, I mean, our office, well, if I'm asking people what are the biggest issues they're facing, affordable housing is like numbers 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. I have to say, like, I can't afford the rent. My kids can't afford a place to live. That's the biggest. Affordability issues more generally, if then you include childcare, healthcare, student debt. How do we make it just feasible for a working class family to afford the cost of living incomes may have gone up just a little bit, wages a little bit, but all those other costs are going up more. So how do we confront affordability? Those are certainly the big issues that I hear. And then, of course, because I'm the comptroller, people are asking, how do we make city government work better? It feels like we're spending a lot of money on these things, but I don't know if we're getting better services. And that my office is working every day to make sure that we're drilling in and saying, we've got to get the most effective services possible, whether that's trash pickup, whether that's readiness for flash floods, whether that's our public schools. And we know we're facing some budget challenges as we move forward into the out years, but we can't balance our budget on the backs of the services that working class and middle class New Yorkers rely on.
Yeah, well, we want to let you know, we thank you, Comptroller Lander, for coming and being with us. A lot that we talked about today. As always, love to have you back. We can continue to break down some things, and you give us some insight to let us know how we're faring as a borough and what we need to know across New York City. So thanks for being with us.
Thank you so much for the invitation. We'll keep the newsletters coming, and I look really forward to being with you in person in the Bronx very soon.
Yes, sir. We do look forward to seeing you. As we say, get well soon, and hopefully we'll get a chance to see you in person real soon. Letting you know we're taking a quick break, but guess what? We've got more here on the Social Justice Forums right after this.
Even though we didn't grow up together, he's my favorite brother.
Hey, sis.
I'm the baby of the family, and he's the gentle giant.
What you know about Port Georgia?
Man, please, that's a classic.
You know when they say people are a rare breed? Yeah, he's that.
I'm sorry, I'll be back in a few hours.
Don't worry, Shug. You know I'm for you.
I know.
Go get the football.
That was my favorite memory. He was always for ya. This is a true story of me, Bridget Floyd, and this guy, George Perry Floyd Jr., my big brother.
ex-drug dealer.
And I'll be your sub today. Can you see anything different as a pill?
No.
You don't know?
Fentanyl is being mixed into everything now. There's only one thing that will save somebody's life. That is naloxone nasal spray.
Fentanyl, it's cheap, it's potent, and it's profitable.
Why would drug dealers put a lethal dose of fentanyl in drugs if they know it's so harmful?
Really just all about the money.
I just didn't realize that one pill could change your whole life.
More kids should know.
And welcome back. Common Justice is at the forefront of developing non-incarceration solutions, transforming the lives of victims and promoting racial unity. In New York City, they run the nation's inaugural alternative to incarceration and victim service program for violent felonies in adult courts. And joining me now is Common Justice Assistant Director of Outreach, Craig Shepard, and then Director of Training, R.J. Maccani. And thank you both for joining us.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you, and I'll start off first with Craig. Thank you. Craig, you're the Director of Outreach, and so when we talk about outreach, talk about the work that you're doing within the community.
Absolutely, thank you. Just want to clarify, I'm the Assistant Director of Outreach. Haven't gotten that quite far yet.
I'm sorry, I do have that here, and I made the mistake. My bad.
No worries, but our outreach in the Bronx specifically, because we do work across 3 boroughs in New York, Manhattan, Brooklyn, and the Bronx. But our outreach efforts in the Bronx are particularly unique to the community. At this point, we're engaged in consistent outreach around case referral with the District Attorney's Office, District Attorney Darcel Clark's office, as well as defense attorneys. But in the Bronx in particular, we recognize that community outreach is integral to our work. So a lot of my work involves outreach with community agencies and organizations, organizers, spiritual leaders, and elected officials throughout the borough.
Yeah. RJ, as alternative to incarceration, I mean, I think that's huge. I think a lot of people across the city can talk about the skyrocketing incarceration rates that we see, both nationally and locally, but your program really has an opportunity to put an alternative to incarceration.
That's right, Daren. You know, we're an anti-violence organization, and so we're both addressing community violence, right? We're both stepping in and supporting survivors who want non-carceral responses to the violence that they've experienced. And we're also addressing the fact that incarceration itself is a form of violence. And so seeking non-violent ways to address the violence that's in our communities.
Yeah. And when we talk about seeking those ways, talk about the work that's going on, because obviously there's some things that you're doing in form of restorative justice, and let's tackle that for a moment.
We create the opportunity for survivors to have the person that harmed them go through an intensive 12 to 15-month program where they're staying in the community, staying connected to their family and friends, but meeting with us every day. And both working to become accountable to that survivor, as well as grow and transform in their own lives so they never cause that kind of harm again.
And when we talk about that, I mean, you know, that's a pretty bold approach. I mean, sometimes people say incarceration is that answer, but as an alternative to incarceration, having this modality available, what have you been able to see? What have you been able to experience?
I've had the opportunity for 6 years to work directly with defendants, the people who've committed the violence, and accompany them on their journey through this process. And what I've gotten to see is people who are parents, who take care of their elders, who are essential workers in our communities, be able to continue in those roles and not be defined by the worst thing that they've ever done. And I've gotten to see survivors get so much from the opportunity to have a role in shaping what happens with the person that's caused them harm.
Craig, talk to me a little bit about outreach, because when you talk about reaching out in the community, that means establishing relationships, community partners. When this program and the work that you're doing is being delved out, how's it being received by community partners?
Absolutely, that's a great question. I think our work is very well received throughout the community. I think what we found is that community members are often asking for new solutions to old issues and old problems, particularly those of violence in the borough and in the community. So I think we found feedback and responses to be generally supportive and positive. We also have an organizing and legislative and policy arm that is always in the field and making sure that we are doing everything within our organization, even in direct service, to create solutions that address the community's needs and desires. So I think they are both responsive and generally supportive, but also they are part of the process in creating and imagining the work that we do.
Yeah. There has to be some sort of impact that we can see within the community, given the fact that when you take a person who had the potential of being incarcerated and you say, listen, you know what? We're going to show you another kind of way. We're going to give you another alternative program. For that person not to have the whole incarceration experience, but to have a transformative experience and then be blended back into the community. Talk to me about that and the impact that you guys are noticing within the community when this model is really fully adapted and you have the cooperation, the successful cooperation of those who are coming under your watch care.
Well, Daren, every single case that comes to us is different. And, what those outcomes look like is different for everyone, just the way that healing is different for every survivor. So just to give you a few examples, a lot of our graduates who were defendants circle back around to us to let us know how they're doing. Very recently, we had a graduate who came back to just let us know that she had completed her certification as a registered nurse. This is someone who's also a mother. And if she had been incarcerated, we would be one nurse down in New York City. And I think that's something that we don't need. But we'd also have her child being raised by someone other than their mother. And we've had over 100 people successfully graduate from this program. In each story, it's similar to the one that I shared.
Yeah, and Craig, for you, obviously doing the work that you're doing right now, what are you seeing from your end as far as the impact and also the receptivity?
I would echo so much of what RJ just shared. I'm seeing young people have the opportunity to remain in their community, work with us to ensure that they are positive contributors to their space and to their community, and also seeing with survivors their ability to get access to our support and services, and really an opportunity to participate in something different than the carceral system, and an opportunity to participate in something that actually addresses their needs, their specific needs as it relates to their healing and their trauma and their journey around all of that work. So I'm seeing and feeling very positive responses and outcomes on both sides.
Yeah. When we talk about the offender, we hear that, they've definitely created this tension and this hurt towards victims. What, from a victim perspective, have you heard in terms of, all right, I'm willing to go along with this? I mean, I think there's sometimes victims are saying, listen, I want to see somebody incarcerated. Talk to me about that relationship between the victim and how they play a part in this as well.
We find in outreach specifically is that most often, unfortunately, we're some of the first people to actually reach out to survivors, and we try not to use the word victim here, really empower our people. What we find is a lot of our survivors, we're the first people to ask them what they want to actually see happen to the other person, rather than being told outcomes, actually asking them what they want to see the outcome. be, and actually getting them involved in imagining and building that outcome. And also, we find that sometimes we're the first people to actually ask them, maybe outside of their closest loved ones, what they've gone through and how that has actually impacted their lives. We find that also in outreach, 9 out of 10 of our survivors are, when presented with this option, are going to say that they actually want to participate and engage with something different, something alternative to the carceral system.
Yeah. RJ?
You know, I've gotten the opportunity to be in a lot of circles with, we use these terms, responsible parties and harm parties, right? Our responsible parties are the people that are responsible for the harm that brings us to that circle. Our harm parties are the people that were harmed in that incident. And I've gotten to be in circles of responsible parties and harm parties, and I've gotten to see harm parties actually get to get real answers on this day, which is something that so many survivors want answers to and often don't get going through the standard court system. I've gotten to see survivors shape the agreements that come out of that circle and really get to say, here's what I want to see from you, this person that hurt me, to make things as right as possible. I know you can't go back in time and undo what you did, but here's what you can do today to make things as right as possible with me.
And so, support for survivors. I mean, obviously, that's the word that we're using, survivors and the support. I want to ask, first of all, because I have a few questions on survivors, but I'll ask the first one. Talk to me and lay out for me a little bit about what goes on here by that support, because they need that as well.
I think similar to something that RJ noted earlier, all of our people come into our world at different times in their lives and based on different circumstances and situations. So for that reason, our intervention with our responsible parties, those responsible for causing harm, they follow a modeled curriculum, but each intervention is particularly unique. And I think that that is also true for our survivors. So they're working directly with our trauma support team, who are exclusively tasked with working with survivors, to come up with individualized service plans. And that really means individualized for each survivor to come up and address their basic needs, first and foremost, always starting with safety, because we recognize that when someone has survived and been a victim of violence or harm, that safety is paramount, and that's often their top concern.
Yeah. RJ, when you have programs such as yourself that are making a difference, you're seeing transformation, you're seeing impact, you're seeing that, right? There's a model of what works. And getting that across the board to legislators, elected officials, as alternatives to incarceration, because I think that's what some people are calling for, more of, right? We're seeing too many people incarcerated for, minor offenses and the mass incarceration rates. Having alternative incarceration, advocacy. Talk to me about advocacy and policy. I mean, obviously, there's a lot of work that's going on in the work of advocacy to say, listen, programs such as yours need to be highlighted and need to be out there.
Yeah, I'd love to say a few things about that, Daren. I think incarceration in the United States, Daren, I don't know if you've ever had a bad habit and you tried to change that habit. And, you tried once, you tried twice, you stayed on path for a while, you fell off. I feel like as a nation, that's where we're at with incarceration. It's a bad habit that we've been practicing for hundreds of years. And so even though there are evidence-based responses to violence that are much more effective than locking people up, when we get a little scared, we get a little nervous, or we even just get a little complacent, we always fall back on our old bad habits. And so what we need to do is just stay focused, stay organized, and continue to move forward actual authentic solutions to violence, like common justice, and like many other programs and processes that are unfolding across the country.
Yeah. And let me get Craig on this right here, because when we talk about, the advocacy that's going on, you're out there on the battlefield doing outreach, right? And you're talking with all these stakeholders, and then these conversations are being had. What is some of those conversations looking like by way of what we're talking about right now?
Absolutely. I think it's a great question. And I think those conversations, we make sure that they're centered around being in response to the voice of the constituents, the people. So whether it's common justice or elected officials, we recognize that we're all working on behalf of communities. So everything that we're doing has to be in response to what they're asking for, what they're looking for. What I found is that elected officials have been very receptive and open, and other community agencies and organizations have been open to having these conversations because we're coming in from a space of inviting feedback and really saying that we want to continue to create, build, and refine something that addresses these issues that everyone is speaking to.
Yeah. So what do we look forward to in the future, RJ? I mean, the work is going on. You're doing some great things. What can people look forward to from the program coming up in the future?
Well, right now we're active in Brooklyn, in Manhattan, in the Bronx, as you know. We'd love to be able to offer this to everyone in New York City. And we're partnering with folks in other cities throughout the country to support them in lifting up and building similar responses to violence.
Yeah. Craig, from your perspective, when you want people, what do you want people to know when it comes about the work that you're doing?
I want people to know that this is something that the people are asking for, and we're very much just providing a solution to, a solution to a problem that has been plaguing our communities for far too long, and very much is something that people are presently asking for. So I just look forward to continuing to be in the work.
Yeah. RJ, I think one of the things that we talk about is the accountability component, right? Because that's the work that's really being done, is that when you provide an alternative to incarceration, I think that some people will say, you know what, I can't really flow with that because there's no real accountability there. Can you answer the question about accountability when you have a program such as yours?
Absolutely. There's a big difference between accountability and punishment, right? And I think a lot of times people get confused around that because we don't have a lot of opportunities to learn about accountability in our lives. We see a lot of punishment. Punishment's a passive experience. You do something wrong, you go sit in the corner, you go sit in prison for a few years. It's something that's done to you. Accountability is actually much harder. Accountability requires you to wake up every day, think about the harm you caused, and then take proactive action to try to make things as right as possible. And that's the kind of space that we hold and the opportunities that we create here at Common Justice for folks that have caused serious harm.
Craig, your thoughts?
I couldn't have said it better myself. The only thing that I'd add is, accountability is also a journey, and sometimes it's a non-linear one, and it's one that exists for us at Common Justice, both internally for all of our participants. What does internal accountability mean and look like? And then ultimately, what does accountability look like to the person that they've harmed and that person's loved ones and the community at large? So the thing I'd add is that it's a journey.
Yeah. RJ, I got to jump in and ask a question about, violence, because we talk about violence, and one of the things that I know that's discussed is that the violence sometimes is perpetuated and further carried out simply based on the fact of racial inequities, and we know that this plays out. I know you're also doing some work to deal with that as well. Talk to us about that, because I think sometimes we get some misinformation. But the reality is the fact is that sometimes racial inequity does drive violence.
No, it's a great point, Daren. I mean, and I think we're all able to walk and chew gum at the same time. Committing an act of violence is a personal choice, right? And we really believe in the agency of the folks that are in our program who have caused harm. We believe in their ability to choose to do something other than violence. And we know that poverty, being stopped and frisked every day, losing people for reasons you shouldn't lose people, we know that these are also drivers of violence. And so if we're serious about ending violence and not just punishing people, locking them up, then we need to really address the drivers of violence. And as Craig mentioned, that both involves internal work, and it also involves responding to those conditions that we know drive violence: poverty, lack of housing, lack of solid education, job opportunities. We can walk and chew gum. We can address both of these things, and we can actually get serious and greatly reduce the violence that we experience throughout the city.
Yeah. What should we be paying attention to right now? Because when we're having these conversations out there, obviously there's, You know, there's legislation to pay attention to. There's other things that we should be paying attention to. RJ, what are some of the things we should keep our eyes on that can further enhance some of the work that you got going on?
Well, I think each of us play a role in, in our family lives, in our workplaces. And I would encourage everyone that's watching, listening in, to really think about what can I do where I stand and where I work to seek non-punishment based responses, non-carceral based responses. How can I contribute to this? And how might I be able to be one of those voices that Craig was speaking to from the community that's really speaking up and saying, hey, we want this and we want more of it.
Yeah. I mean, wanting more of it is certainly what I think the community is calling for, because we do want to see an end to mass incarceration. Don't get me wrong. I think that everybody says the people that need to be held accountable need to be held accountable, and the people who need to be punished need to be punished. However, there are some people who need punishment through accountability, and I think that's one of the things that we're talking about right here, is how a program can actually offer somebody an alternative to incarceration and what that does. Because, as you said, you don't want to be defined by the worst mistake that you make, but there's so many people who are defined, and we know that once you go down that path of being defined, changing people's opinions and or perceptions is a huge uphill battle. I see both of you shaking your head. I'll let you give your thought and elaboration. I'll start first with Craig.
Oh no, sorry. I was waiting for a question. I was gonna offer up an amen. We also recognize those drivers of violence that RJ just named, and that list goes on. And that list, unfortunately, we know also affects and impacts specific populations. I think beyond that, everything that you just touched on about the impacts of actually having a criminal record, especially a felony record, is also legitimate. So I was just nodding in agreement and affirmation.
Yeah. RJ, talk to me a little bit about, we know mental illness can sometimes be a part. Mental health is also a part of what we're seeing. How are we able to address the issue of mental health when it comes to sometimes this issue of incarceration?
Yeah, mental health response is definitely an area that is not best treated through heightened policing and incarceration. I feel like it's something that we shouldn't even have to argue, and yet here we are again. It's a bad habit. We continue to lean on policing and incarceration in response to any sort of social problem. And what we know is that folks that are going through a mental health crisis that may need support are best supported both by supportive people that are already in their networks, their families and community, and specialists, workers who know how to respond to those particular situations.
Yeah. I want to give you both an opportunity to share a little bit more with our viewers about the work and how they can better support the work. And so on an overall level, Craig, for the outreach that you're doing, how can people support? I mean, you're out there. How can they connect?
Absolutely. Thank you for asking, and thank you for this opportunity. I think some of the things that RJ named is being active in their communities, whether that's participating in, local council or community board meetings, precinct council meetings. These are a lot of the outward-facing opportunities that we have to not just present about the work that we're doing, but also to listen to members of the community. And I think I just want to double down on what RJ said and encourage everyone to think about what they can do to imagine alternatives, even within their everyday lives, even if it's not in response to crime, even if it's just in response to interpersonal conflict, because I think a lot of this work starts with imagining new possibilities, but also just being present and showing up in the community when possible.
Yeah. And RJ, yourself, let's get there and talk a little bit about any upcoming plans you might have.
Well, Daren, I'd be remiss to say that if I didn't say that we were hiring. So if you're listening to this, you're watching this, and you think, you know what, I think I might want to do that kind of work, go to commonjustice.org, see our open positions, see if there's work you want to do. If you want to be more active around the legislative piece, check out our fair access to victim compensation policy that we're moving in the state, and get involved in that campaign. there's a lot of ways to plug in through our website, and I want to encourage folks to go check it out and also look for us on social media.
Yeah. Where do we find you on social media?
Oh man, I'm an ex-Anio, Daren. I'm a little too old to really be talking about social media in that depth. But you know, I know we got Facebook. Pretty sure we got Instagram. Look for it, Common Justice. We're probably tweeting. I'm not on Twitter.
Oh, don't worry, I got it. My producers got it for me, so don't worry. We got you hooked up. Listen, I understand. Everybody doesn't know, but yeah, we are Common Justice. That's what you can find them at on Facebook. So we can definitely do that. I feel you, RJ. There's some people say, look, listen. Let the kids and grandkids handle that. That's not me. I got you.
There you go, Dan.
Craig, for you, as again, with the work that you're doing, you know, speak to those persons that you might be, who could be potential stakeholders. What would you want them to know before we go?
What I would want them to know is that possibilities are endless. And I think that we need to do better to break out of some of these bad habits, but that it starts with us all. It starts with us building this foundation and being in conversation and just recognizing that this is a solution. It is not the one-size-fits-all solution to all of the problems and issues that plague the community, but it's one that I really want to be in conversation about. I really invite people to learn and dig deeper into the world and work of restorative justice and transformative justice, both of which exist outside of common justice and have existed prior to common justice. So I just encourage people to be informed, be involved, ask questions, and really use your imagination because the possibilities are endless.
Yeah, I'm gonna give you both 30 seconds each. Talk to me a little bit about why you got involved in the work. 30 seconds each. Go ahead.
I can go first. I'm a survivor of violence, also committed harm in my life, and I think that we all deserve the opportunity to both get real justice and to give real justice. I'll leave it at that.
All righty, Craig?
I'm involved as, you know, I think I came into this work as somebody who considered themselves directly impacted, but I've stayed in this work because I truly believe in it.
All right. Well, that about ends it for us, man. I mean, I want to let you know, I thank you guys for being with us and really sharing. Common Justice is an organization that's doing some great work for alternatives to incarceration. I think you guys have really elevated the conversation that it's really necessary for us to think about alternatives to incarceration, because it's very easy to just, you know, you just can't legislate and fix the problem just by saying we're going to throw everybody in jail. Everybody doesn't need to be in jail. People just need help sometimes. There are some people that need to go to jail, don't get me wrong. Don't send me emails. People don't need, yes, there's some people that need to go to jail, but everybody doesn't have to go to jail, and that's what you're working towards. So, RJ, Craig, thank you so much for the work that you're doing.
Thank you, Darren.
Thank you, Darren.
All righty. Well, I want to thank you, and I'll let you know we come to the end of our show today. I hope that you enjoyed this week's discussion on the Bronx Social Justice and Anti-Violence Forums. To rewatch this week's edition, catch us here, BronxNet Channel 67. Also, BronxNet.org. Now, if you want to join the conversation, present your point of view, please visit our social media at BronxNet TV. Join us next week. We'll elevate the discussion and bring further awareness across the globe. I'm your host, Daren Jaime. Take care, and God bless.